David, as a philosopher and as a rabbi, how do you see the worth of philosophy for religion in general and for Judaism in specific?
Well, for me in particular, I've really done philosophy of religion in two ways, and I think both of them really contributed in different ways to make me grow religiously. I actually teach at Yeshiva University, who's at Stern College for Women, and the motto of Yeshiva University is Torah u-Madda, which means that one must combine Torah, or the Jewish body of knowledge, with general culture. And that's the way I've lived my life. The two types of philosophy, the two different avenues to studying religion have been, first of all, what would roughly be called the analytic school, which is very common in America. In England, this is all the rage there primarily. The other is through kind of continental philosophy, European philosophy, which deals with questions more about the inner life of the believer. What is it? What is the psyche of the believer when he prays, when he has an experience of the holy, when he repents, and so forth.
Phenomenology.
Right, kind of religious phenomenology is basically what it is. And I think as I've sort of gone on in life, I've appreciated more than I did before the phenomenological aspect. But still, I think, my first love and the first way I got into this was through analytic philosophy. And what analytic philosophy does is there's really two things primarily. First of all, it clarifies a lot of religious concepts. You have concepts like, God's being omniscient, God's being omnipotent, he's all powerful, knowing, knows everything, can do everything, is all good. Maybe you have stuff, he's out of time, some people say, and the like. And there's a lot of clarification that's needed of those concepts, particularly since some of them actually conflict with other sorts of religious doctrines. There's a little bit of a danger in making this one's concentration, and I can sort of best illustrate it by an anecdote about a student I had when I was doing a problem with a certain approach to reconciling foreknowledge and free will. And
how God could know the future, and yet
God can know the future, right? And then
yet we still are supposedly free.
And we have free will. And I put this kind of approach on the board, and a student asked me, in all innocence, do you mean to tell me that the existence of God might depend on the scope of a quantifier? Quantify being a device that's used in symbolic logic. Also, some people who've worked in this area of clarifying concepts have found that there's a certain distance that it creates between biblically based religion and sort of philosophically based religion, which they look at more as showing the influence of Hellenism than the influence of the Bible itself. I mean, I think
so
the
that
best
would be
example,
a negative to some people.
That would be a negative to some
truly
people.
Religious believers
right.
in all faiths.
That's right. That's right. A sort of gap that people see between biblical religion and what philosophers have done with it. I think the best example of this is the concept of God not having emotions. You look at the Bible, God has a great deal of personality. God gets angry, God gets sad, sometimes he's furious, and it sort of portrays God, not sort of, but it portrays God as a personality. Then you get to philosophy, and philosophy tells you God can't have emotions. Because
that would be an imperfection.
Has emotions, it would be an imperfection because he changes. And this is really based on an old idea, Greek idea essentially, of what perfection is. Perfection involves unchangeability, staticness, and that concept doesn't really mesh with the biblical. There's been an interesting development in analytic philosophy of religion over the past 2 decades, I think, where philosophers are becoming very conscious of this gap. And they're raising a lot of questions as to whether the attributes and the concepts that they introduce in trying to describe God are really ones that they need. This whole idea of God's changelessness has undergone some reconsideration. And with that, there's been a reconsideration of this idea that God has emotions. Even concepts like God knowing the future have come into question. That's a story in itself. So clarifying concepts is really the first thing I see analytic philosophy of religion doing, and it's been great for me personally. I just want to mention that my concentration in Jewish philosophy came later in life, after I had studied general philosophy, and I found it was extraordinarily illuminating in approaching theological, philosophical texts in Judaism. The second function, besides clarifying concepts, is trying to prove the existence of God, if you're religious. If you're an atheist, you're trying to disprove the existence of God. In the Jewish tradition, as in Muslim tradition and in Christian tradition, there was a lot of work done on trying to prove the existence of God. So much so that a number of Jewish philosophers, Sa'ad Gaon, who was regarded as the father of medieval Jewish philosophy, he was head of the academy in Babylonia, died around 942, Bachya ibn Pekuda, to name another, and then the famous Maimonides, the most famous Jewish philosopher of all time, where everybody had defined themselves either as a sympathizer with Maimonides or an antagonist. They believed that it is a religious obligation to study philosophy. So much so that Maimonides actually includes this in the mitzvah or commandment to study Torah, Talmud Torah. Why would they think such a thing? Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, for Maimonides, the activity of proving what the world is like and thinking about God is itself going to lead to the love of God. A lot of philosophers question this, most notably Judah Halevi, who actually died before Maimonides wrote. But Halevi believed, as later on Kierkegaard believed, that reason cools the passions, right? That you're not going to get love out of the existence of God. What you're going to do is get an abstractness, and you're going to study God the way in which the astronomer studies the stars, where he couldn't care less whether he turns out he had the wrong theory one day. And Halevi believes you can't have love of God this way. You can come to the idea of a creator, but not the idea of a personal God. Still, this notion of philosophy as a religious obligation is tied up with the idea of love of God. The second thing that I think made philosophy valuable, it comes in a little small comment that's made by Sa'ad Gaon, where he says, we study philosophy for a number of reasons. One of them is to answer the heretic, and the other, he says, is to make it a matter of actual knowledge to us. Now, here's the way I understand that. Suppose you have a math problem, and you're trying to work on the solution and you can't quite solve it. You go to the back of the book, where they have the odd-numbered exercises, the answers to those, and the answer is the square root of 37. Well, you now know that the answer to that problem is the square root of 37. But in another sense, you don't really know it. You don't understand what the justification is. You're not placing it in the context of other things that you know. And I think this is what Saja means when he talks about the idea of making the knowledge of the existence of God a matter of actual knowledge to us.
And this can be accomplished through philosophy.
This could be accomplished through philosophy. And Saja's whole book is devoted to taking beliefs that people held on the basis of tradition and showing how they can be justified philosophically. And he went very far, further than, let's say, Maimonides did, in terms of identifying which beliefs could be proved. Not just the existence of God for him. You could prove the world was created out of nothing, for example, which is something Maimonides thought was not provable. Resurrection and the like. These also were things that for him were provable. The title of his book, very revealing, the title of his book in Hebrew, which was written in Arabic, is Sefer Emunot V'Dayot. Now, emunot refers to beliefs that are based on tradition. Dayot refers to beliefs that are based on philosophy. The idea of the book is to take emunot, the beliefs that are based on tradition, and to turn them into dayot, into ideas that are a matter of, quote, actual knowledge to us.
So in a sense, it makes it more rigorous. It subjects it to a more analytical approach. But,
Right.
but some
Right.
in religious circles, particularly the more religious, the more orthodox, and,
Right.
and more fundamental in various faiths, look very askance on philosophy as undermining their faith.
Right. During the Middle Ages, in fact, there was a fierce debate between the rationalists and the anti-rationalists, and in certain very clear senses, the anti-rationalists won. And I'll mention in particular that the rise of the movement that's known as Hasidism brought out a lot of hostility towards philosophy as an alien discipline. And nowadays, there is this tremendous struggle between those who don't want to go near it. So one thought that I have here is William James defined philosophy as an unusually stubborn attempt to think things through. By that definition, it wasn't only the rationalists who were philosophers, but even the anti-rationalists, because they had their own reasons, their own considerations.